9, they say a mother's love knows no bounds. I used to believe that meant sacrificing everything, my time, my dreams, my identity, all for my children's happiness. My name is Sarah Johnson, and at 58 years old, I discovered that true love, both for my family and myself, sometimes means buying a one-way ticket to the Bahamas while my son's dog watches in confusion from the neighbor's house. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment I realized I needed to rewrite the rules of my life wasn't when David asked me to dog-sit Max for the 5th time that year. It wasn't even when Emma accidentally forgot to invite me to Lily's dance recital. It was when I stood in my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, holding my phone and reading the text that just arrived. "Mom, we're headed to Aspen for 2 weeks. Can you take Max? We'll drop him off tomorrow morning. Thanks." "No, please. No. Would you mind?" Not even a phone call, just the absolute certainty that I would rearrange my life to accommodate their ski vacation, a vacation I hadn't even known they were planning. A vacation they hadn't thought to include me in, despite knowing I'd been saying for years how much I'd love to teach my grandchildren to ski, just as I'd taught David when he was small. I stared at that message until my screen went dark, and in that darkness, something inside me finally clicked into place. I had spent 32 years putting my son first, working extra shifts at the hospital to pay for his college, postponing vacations so he could go to soccer camp, even helping with the down payment on that house in Oakwood Estates that Emma had insisted they couldn't live without. The house with 5 bedrooms and a pool, while I still lived in the modest ranch home where I'd raised David as a single mother after his father walked out when he was just 7. For what? To be the convenient dog sitter? To be the emergency babysitter who was summoned and dismissed at their convenience? To be the ATM when their lifestyle exceeded their means? I set my phone down and walked to the hall closet where I kept a small wooden box of mementos. Inside was a faded brochure for a beachfront resort in Nassau that my colleague Nancy had brought back from her honeymoon 15 years ago. "You should go someday, Sarah," she'd said. "The water is so clear you can see your toes wiggling in the sand." I'd tucked it away, adding it to my mental someday list, that ever-growing collection of dreams that kept getting pushed further into an indefinite future. Well, someday had arrived. By the time David and Emma pulled into my driveway the next morning, Max bouncing excitedly in the back seat next to piles of expensive luggage, I had made my decision. I greeted them with a smile that felt different on my face. Lighter somehow. Less strained. "Morning, Mom," David said, already unloading Max's supplies. "We brought his food, his toys, his medication for his anxiety. He gets nervous when we're gone, and his special orthopedic bed. He needs to be walked 3 times a day. And remember, he can't have any human food except boiled chicken if he's not eating." I nodded, watching as he piled bags of premium dog food on my porch. "Actually, David, I've made other arrangements for Max." His hands stilled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I won't be available to watch Max for the next 2 weeks. I've asked Carol next door to take him. She loves dogs, and Max already knows her." David straightened, confusion creasing his brow. Emma stepped out of their Range Rover, frowning. "Is everything okay, Sarah? Are you sick?" The concern in her voice might have seemed genuine if it hadn't been immediately followed by, "Because we really can't change our plans at this point. The resort is fully booked, and we've already paid the deposit." "I'm perfectly healthy," I assured them. "I've just made plans of my own." "Plans?" David echoed, as if the concept of his mother having plans was somehow foreign. "What plans?" "I'm going to the Bahamas," I said, the words sending a little thrill down my spine. "My flight leaves tomorrow morning." The stunned silence that followed was worth every penny of the surprisingly affordable package deal I'd booked at 2 a.m. "The Bahamas?" Emma recovered first. "But that's so impulsive. And what about Max? You know how attached he is to you." It was true. Max was attached to me. He was a sweet dog who'd been a puppy when David and Emma first brought him home, full of promises about how they would train him and care for him. Somehow, over the years, Max had spent almost as much time at my house as at theirs. Bertus. Trips, weekend getaways, home renovations. There was always a reason Max needed to stay with me. Carol is happy to take him, I repeated. I've already discussed it with her. She works from home, so Max will have company all day. I've written out his schedule and medication instructions. David was still staring at me as if I'd announced I was moving to the moon. Mom, you can't just take off to the Bahamas. That's not like you. There it was, the box he'd placed me in years ago. The reliable, predictable mother who would always be available, always say yes, always put her own plans aside for his convenience. Well, that box had just been opened, and I had no intention of climbing back inside. Actually, David, I can, and I am. I smiled, surprised by how calm I felt. Carol will be coming by in about 10 minutes to meet Max and get his things. If you'd like to tell her anything specific about his care, you're welcome to wait. But, Mom, he tried again. We were counting on you. You've always watched Max for us. Yes, I have, I agreed. And perhaps that's part of the problem. We've fallen into patterns that aren't working for me anymore. Emma's expression shifted from confusion to something harder. Is this about money? Because if you need help with bills or something, you should just ask instead of being passive-aggressive. The irony of Emma, who had borrowed thousands from me for their kitchen renovation just last year, suggesting I might need financial help, would have been funny if it weren't so infuriating. But I kept my voice even. This isn't about money, Emma. This is about me finally taking some time for myself after decades of putting everyone else first. Just then, Carol's Honda pulled into my driveway. She waved cheerfully as she stepped out, her gray curls bouncing. At 62, my neighbor had more energy than most people half her age, filling her retirement with volunteer work, pottery classes, and doting on her grandchildren when they visited. There she is, I called, waving back. Perfect timing, Carol. As Carol approached, Max recognized her and barked happily, tail wagging. He'd spent plenty of time with Carol when she would check on him during my occasional hospital shifts that ran long. Hello, Johnson family. Carol greeted us warmly. And there's my buddy Max, ready for a 2-week sleepover at my place? David looked from Carol to me, clearly still processing. Mom, can we talk about this privately for a minute? I shook my head. There's nothing to discuss, David. My trip is booked. Carol is prepared to watch Max, and your vacation awaits. Unless you'd prefer to take Max with you to Aspen? The look on his face answered that question clearly enough. Taking Max to a ski resort would complicate their plans, require pet fees at their accommodation, and limit their activities. It was far more convenient to drop him with Mom, the ever-reliable fallback plan. Fine, he said finally, his voice tight. But we should talk when I get back. I look forward to it, I replied sincerely. We have a lot to discuss about how we relate to each other going forward. After David reluctantly gave Carol Max's care instructions and Emma made several pointed comments about the trip being so unlike me and very last minute, they finally departed, leaving Max happily exploring Carol's pockets for the treats she always carried. Well, Carol said with a twinkle in her eye once their car had disappeared down the street. That was entertaining. Are you really going to the Bahamas? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yes, I nodded, feeling a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Yes, I am. Good for you, Sarah, she said, giving my arm a squeeze. It's about time. That night, as I packed my suitcase, a graduation gift to myself when I'd finished nursing, school 35 years ago, barely used since, I found myself questioning my decision. Was I being petty? Overreacting? Selfish? I picked up a framed photo from my dresser. David at his college graduation, beaming in his cap and gown, his arm around my shoulders. I had worked so hard for that moment. Night shifts, overtime, careful budgeting, all to give him opportunities I'd never had. And I didn't regret any of it. I was proud of him, of the successful software engineer he'd become. But somewhere along the way, my role as his mother had morphed into something uncomfortable, a mix of convenient childcare provider, pet sitter, and occasional emergency fund. The invitations to family events had grown more sporadic, the phone calls briefer, and almost always ending with a request for some favor. It wasn't that David didn't love me. I knew he did. It was that he had grown accustomed to my love taking the form of endless, uncomplaining sacrifice. And that was on me. I had trained him to expect it. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Mom, please reconsider this trip. Emma is really stressed about Max staying with Carol. We can talk about finding better arrangements for the future when we get back. Not, I'm sorry for assuming you'd rearrange your life for my convenience. Not, I understand you deserve time for yourself." Just another attempt to get me to fall back in line with their expectations. I typed back, "Max will be perfectly happy with Carol. Enjoy your vacation. We'll talk when we all return." Then I silenced my phone and continued packing. The next morning, I stood at the airport gate with my boarding pass in hand, still half expecting to turn around and go home. This wasn't like me. I didn't take spontaneous trips to tropical islands. I didn't spend money on luxury resorts. I didn't prioritize my desires over other people's needs. Except, maybe it was time I did. Maybe this new version of Sarah Johnson, the one buying a sun hat from the airport shop and splurging on an overpriced coffee, had been waiting patiently for decades for permission to exist. As I boarded the plane, a strange sense of peace settled over me. Whatever happened next, whether David understood my actions or not, whether this trip was everything I'd dreamed or a complete disaster, I had taken a step toward reclaiming something vital that I'd surrendered long ago. My right to put myself first sometimes. The flight attendant smiled as she checked my boarding pass. "First time to Nassau?" "Yes," I replied, suddenly grinning, but definitely not my last adventure. When the plane lifted off, I didn't look back. The transformation began somewhere over the Atlantic. Perhaps it was the simple act of putting physical distance between myself and the roles I'd played for so long. Or maybe it was the complimentary glass of champagne the flight attendant offered, which I accepted, another small departure from my usual habits. Whatever the cause, by the time the plane touched down in Nassau, I felt like a different person, lighter, as if I'd set down a heavy burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The Coral Sands Resort was exactly as it had appeared in the brochure I'd kept all these years, its pink stucco building set against the impossibly blue Caribbean Sea. My room was small but perfect, with a balcony overlooking the beach and the gentle sound of waves providing a constant soothing soundtrack. That first evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in years, perhaps decades, I had no obligations, no schedule to maintain, no one else's needs to consider. The freedom was almost dizzying. On the second day, I ventured to the beach, self-conscious in the modest one-piece swimsuit I'd purchased hastily before the trip. I'd avoided swimwear for years, always finding excuses to stay on the shore during family outings to the lake, always volunteering to watch the bags or prepare the picnic while others enjoyed the water. "Perfect day for swimming," remarked a voice beside me as I hesitated at the edge of the sand. I turned to find a man about my age smiling warmly. He had kind eyes crinkled at the corners and salt and pepper hair that somehow seemed distinguished rather than merely gray. "I'm working up my courage," I admitted with a small laugh. "Ah, not a swimmer?" "Not for many years," I said, I've been busy. He nodded as if this explained everything. I'm Thomas, he said, extending his hand. First-time visitor to the island and attempting to embrace the live-a-little philosophy my children keep telling me I need. Sarah, I replied, shaking his hand. Also a first-timer. Also being more adventurous than usual. Well, Sarah, what do you say we be adventurous together? The water's supposed to be wonderfully warm, and I've been promised there are no sharks in this particular bay. Under normal circumstances, my normal circumstances, I would have politely declined. I didn't go swimming with strangers. I didn't engage in friendly banter with unknown men on beaches. I didn't do impulsive, potentially embarrassing things, like wade into the Caribbean in a hastily purchased swimsuit. But I wasn't living under normal circumstances anymore. I was living under new rules. My rules. Why not? I said, and followed him toward the water. That swim, my first in over a decade, washed away years of self-consciousness and forgotten joy. The water was indeed wonderfully warm, clear enough to see colorful fish darting around our legs, and being in it felt like returning to a pleasure I'd denied myself far too long. Thomas turned out to be a widower from Portland, visiting the Bahamas on his late wife's birthday as a way of honoring her dream to see the islands. Margaret always wanted to come here, he explained as we sat later on beach chairs, drying in the sun. We kept putting it off. The kids were too young. Then college was too expensive. Then there were the grandchildren. We always thought we had time. His words resonated painfully. How many dreams had I deferred, assuming someday would eventually arrive? What about you? He asked. What brings a woman like you to Nassau alone? I hesitated, uncertain how to explain my presence without sounding like I was having some sort of late-life crisis. But Thomas waited patiently, his expression open and non-judgmental. I'm reclaiming my life, I said finally, surprised by the conviction in my voice. My son and daughter-in-law left their dog with me, again, so they could take a family vacation, without me, again. Instead of being the reliable babysitter for their pet, I decided to take the trip I've been dreaming about for 15 years. Thomas threw back his head and laughed, a genuine warm sound that made me smile despite myself. Good for you, he said when he'd recovered. Seriously, good for you. I wish Margaret had done something like that just once. Put herself first. She was always taking care of everyone else, right up until the end. We spent the afternoon talking, discovering coincidental similarities in our lives. He had been an architect before retiring. I shared my work as a physical therapist at Riverdale Community Hospital. He had 2 daughters. I had my son. We both loved classic films, preferred mountains to beaches, despite our current location, and harbored secret dreams of learning to paint. That evening, we had dinner together at the resort restaurant. It wasn't a date, or at least neither of us called it that, just 2 travelers enjoying company. But when he walked me to my room afterward, there was a moment of possibility that both thrilled and terrified me. I've enjoyed today, Sarah, he said softly. Perhaps we could explore the island together tomorrow? I hear there's a wonderful market in town. I'd like that, I replied, meaning it. After he left, I checked my phone for the first time that day. 3 missed calls from David, 2 from Emma, and a flurry of increasingly frustrated texts. Mom, Carol says Max isn't eating properly. Call me. Why aren't you answering? This isn't like you. Emma is really upset about Max. Can you please check in with Carol? Mom, seriously, call me back. We're worried. The final message had come just an hour ago. This is so irresponsible. We're cutting our trip short and coming back to get Max tomorrow. Thanks a lot. My first instinct was familiar, the rush of guilt, the immediate impulse to call and apologize, to fix whatever was wrong. But I made myself stop and think. I had checked in with Carol that morning via email, and she had reported that Max was doing fine, a bit reluctant with his food the first day, but otherwise adjusting well. This was manipulation, plain and simple. David and Emma were unaccustomed to me being unavailable, to me having boundaries, to me saying no. Their reaction was to escalate, to create a crisis that would force me back into my familiar role. Instead of calling David, I texted Carol, "How is Max doing really? I'm getting concerned messages from David." Her response came quickly. "Max is absolutely fine. Eating well, we went for 3 walks today and he's currently snoring on my couch. David has called me 6 times. I think he's the one with separation anxiety, not the dog." She'd attached a photo of Max, indeed sleeping peacefully, one paw draped dramatically over his eyes. Relief mixed with frustration. I typed back a quick thank you to Carol, then turned my phone off completely and placed it in the hotel safe. David would survive without my immediate response, just as Max was surviving, thriving even, without my constant attention. That night, I slept better than I had in years, lulled by the sound of waves and the newfound certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. The days that followed unfolded with a dreamlike quality. Thomas and I explored Nassau's markets and museums, sampled local cuisine, and even took a boat tour to see dolphins playing in the deeper waters beyond the bay. We talked about our families, our pasts, our regrets and hopes, with the kind of openness that sometimes only happens between strangers who unexpectedly become friends. "You know what I've noticed about you?" Thomas said on our 5th day, as we shared a lunch of conch fritters and cold beer at a beachside cafe. "You keep checking your watch and apologizing for taking too much time, as if someone's waiting for you or you're on some kind of schedule." I blinked, realizing he was right. Even here, thousands of miles from my obligations, I was behaving as if my time wasn't fully my own. "Old habits," I murmured. "I've spent so long organizing my life around other people's needs that I don't quite know how to just exist without watching the clock." "Try taking your watch off," he suggested gently. "Just for today. See what happens." I hesitated, then unclasped my watch, a practical, inexpensive timepiece I'd worn for years, and tucked it into my bag. The tan line on my wrist looked starkly pale against my sun-kissed skin. "There," Thomas smiled. "Now you're on island. Time." That afternoon stretched luxuriously as we strolled along the shore, collecting shells and talking about everything and nothing. Without my watch, I found myself paying more attention to the world around me, the changing colors of the sea as the sun shifted, the patterns in the sand left by the retreating tide, the delicate architecture of the shells we gathered. When Thomas kissed me as the sun was setting, it felt both unexpected and inevitable, a natural extension of the connection we'd been building. His lips were gentle against mine, asking rather than demanding, and when we pulled apart, we were both smiling like teenagers. "I wasn't planning on that," he admitted, his hand still warm against mine. "Neither was I replied. "But I'm glad it happened." On my final evening in Nassau, I finally turned my phone back on, bracing myself for the barrage of messages I knew would be waiting. They were there. Dozens of texts and calls from David, a few from Emma, even one from my sister asking if I was okay because David had called her concerned about my strange behavior. But there was something different now. Reading through David's messages, I could see the progression from anger, "I can't believe you're being so selfish," to confusion, "Mom, this isn't like you," to something approaching understanding. "I talked to Carol about some things. Maybe we need to reevaluate how we've been treating you." The most recent text, sent just that morning, simply read, "I hope you're having a good time, Mom. We got Max yesterday. He was fine. We should talk when you get back. I'm sorry." Those last 2 words glowed on the screen. When was the last time David had apologized to me for anything? I couldn't remember. I sent a brief reply. Having a wonderful time. Will call. When I return. Love you. Then I put the phone away again and went to meet Thomas for our last dinner together. Over candlelight and the best seafood I'd ever tasted, we talked about the future, specifically, what happened after we returned to our respective lives. Thomas lived in Portland, I in Riverdale. Not an impossible distance, but not exactly conducive to casual dating either. I'd like to see you again, Thomas said, his eyes serious. I know it's complicated. We both have families, lives, routines. But this week has been special. At least for me. For me too, I admitted. The connection I felt with him was unlike anything I'd experienced in years. Easy, natural, free of the expectations and patterns that had defined my other relationships for so long. So we'll try? He asked, reaching for my hand across the long distance, taking it slow, seeing where it leads. I thought about what awaited me back in Riverdale, the conversation with David that needed to happen, the boundaries that needed to be established, the changes I wanted to make in how I lived my daily life. Adding a long-distance relationship to that mix would be challenging. But if this trip had taught me anything, it was that I was stronger and more capable than I'd given myself credit for, that I deserved joy and connection just as much as anyone else, that it wasn't too late to create a life that fulfilled me. Yes, I said, squeezing his hand. We'll try. When my plane touched down back in Riverdale, I was tanned, rested, and carrying something more valuable than any souvenir, a new perspective on what my life could be. David was waiting at the airport, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot when he spotted me. For a moment, I saw him through fresh eyes, not just as my son who sometimes took advantage, but as a human being with his own flaws and struggles, trying to navigate relationships just as imperfectly as I was. Mom, he said, stepping forward to take my bag. You look different. I smiled. A week in the Bahamas will do that. No, it's not just the tan. He studied my face. You seem, I don't know, stronger. I am, I said simply. As we drove toward my house, the silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, David cleared his throat. I owe you an apology, Mom. Actually, a lot of apologies. I waited, giving him space to continue. When you wouldn't dog-sit Max, I was angry. I thought you were being difficult on purpose, trying to punish us for not inviting you to Aspen. He paused, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. But then Carol said something that really hit home. She asked how often we considered what you wanted versus what was convenient for us. And the honest answer was, almost never. That sounds like Carol, I said, smiling slightly. She doesn't mince words. No, she doesn't. He glanced at me briefly. She also mentioned all the times you've rearranged your schedule for us, often without much notice or gratitude, and about how you never complain, just keep giving and giving. It made me realize what we've been taking for granted. We pulled into my driveway, but neither of us moved to get out of the car. I've enabled it, I said gently. I've been so afraid of not being needed, of losing my place in your life, that I've allowed myself to be used rather than setting healthy boundaries. David looked down at his hands. I don't want you to feel used, Mom. That was never my intention. I know that, but intentions and impact are different things. I touched his arm. I love you, David. That will never change, but my relationship with you needs to change if I'm going to be happy and fulfilled in this stage of my life. What does that mean exactly? He asked, a hint of the little boy who'd always feared abandonment creeping into his voice. It means I'll still be part of your lives, still love you and Lily and Jake, and yes, even Max. But I'll also be living my own life, taking trips, pursuing interests, maybe even dating. I thought of Thomas, who had already texted to confirm he'd arrived safely in Portland. It means sometimes I'll say no, and that needs to be respected. David nodded slowly. That sounds reasonable. More than reasonable. He hesitated. Does this mean you met someone in the Bahamas? I laughed, surprised by his perceptiveness. Maybe. It's early days. A small smile tugged at his lips. Good for you, Mom. As we carried my luggage into the house, I felt a sense of homecoming that went beyond the physical return. I was coming home to myself, to the woman I'd been before sacrifice became my defining characteristic, to the dreams I'd deferred for too long, to a future shaped by choice rather than obligation. That night, after David left with promises of a family dinner soon, one that would be planned with my schedule in mind, I sat on my back porch watching the stars. They weren't as bright as they'd been in Nassau, but they were familiar, constant, a reminder that some things remained unchanged even as everything else transformed. My phone chimed with a text from Thomas. Missing the ocean and your company. How was the homecoming? I smiled as I typed back. Better than expected. Beginning a new chapter, missing you too. The path ahead wasn't perfectly clear. There would be missteps and backsliding, old patterns reasserting themselves, new boundaries being tested. The conversation with Emma would likely be more challenging than the one with David. My relationship with Thomas would face the hurdles of distance and the complication of merging two established lives. But for the first time in decades, I was excited about the uncertainty. Because it was my uncertainty, my journey, my life to shape as I chose. All because my son took a family trip, left me with the dog, and I decided, finally, that the Bahamas were calling my name more loudly than obligation ever could. The whitecaps of Nassau's crystal waters were just a memory now as I settled back into my daily routine in Riverdale. 2 weeks had passed since my return, and while the tan was fading, the clarity I'd gained remained. Thomas and I spoke daily, our connection deepening despite the distance. We'd already planned a weekend together next month. This time he would come to Riverdale, and I would show him my world. But not everything had transitioned as smoothly as my budding romance. David and I had reached a tentative understanding, but Emma remained cool and distant. The promised family dinner had happened, but conversation had been strained, with Emma making pointed comments about reliable family members and the importance of being there for the people who need you. I had maintained my composure, refusing to rise to the bait or fall back into old patterns of appeasing and placating. The real test came on a rainy Wednesday afternoon when my phone rang as I was finishing my shift at the hospital. Emma's name flashed on the screen, and I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the automatic response to her calls that had developed over years of last-minute requests and thinly veiled demands. Sarah? Thank goodness you answered, Emma began without preamble. I need a huge favor. My mother was supposed to watch Lily and Jake this weekend while David and I attend this charity gala for his company, but she just called with some excuse about her book club retreat. Could you take them? It would just be Friday evening through Sunday afternoon. You haven't seen them much since you got back from your vacation. The hesitation before vacation spoke volumes, as if my trip had been some frivolous indulgence rather than a long overdue act of self-care. I paused, considering my response. In the past, I would have immediately rearranged my weekend plans to accommodate them, grateful for the opportunity to see my grandchildren even if it came with strings attached. I'm sorry, Emma, but I already have plans this weekend, I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. The silence on the other end stretched for several beats. Plans? What plans? I'm attending a watercolor workshop on Saturday, and Sunday I'm having brunch with Nancy and Carol. Another pause. Well, surely you can reschedule a painting class and brunch. This is important. It's a major networking opportunity for David. His boss will be there. I understand it's important, I replied. But my commitments are important. To me as well. Perhaps your sister could help? Or you could hire a sitter? Emma's voice sharpened. A sitter? For the entire weekend? Do you know how expensive that would be? And you know how the children are with strangers? The guilt was right there, hovering at the edges of my consciousness, the familiar weight of it ready to settle back onto my shoulders. But I took a deep breath and held firm. I'm sorry I can't help this time. I hope you find a solution. That works for everyone. I can't believe you're being this selfish, Emma snapped. After everything we've done for you. The accusation was so startling I nearly laughed. What exactly have you done for me, Emma? She sputtered briefly. We include you in family gatherings. We let you spend time with your grandchildren. David fixed your garbage disposal last year. Those aren't favors, Emma. That's basic family reciprocity. And I appreciate David fixing my disposal, just as I appreciate that he recognizes the thousands of hours I've spent supporting him throughout his life. This isn't like you, Sarah, she said, changing tactics. You've been different since that impulsive trip. I'm worried about you. There it was again. The implication that setting boundaries, having my own life, was somehow evidence of instability or poor judgment. It was a manipulation tactic I now recognized clearly. I'm not different, Emma. I'm just no longer pretending that my time and needs matter less than everyone else's. I love Lily and Jake, and I want to be a regular part of their lives, but as their grandmother, not as your emergency childcare service. Fine, she said coldly. I'll tell David you were too busy with your painting hobby to help his career. I'm sure he'll understand completely. The call ended, and I leaned against the wall of the hospital corridor, suddenly exhausted. Standing my ground was harder than I'd anticipated. The guilt and doubt crept in immediately. Was I being unreasonable? Should I call back and cancel? My plans after all? I looked down at my hands that had worked tirelessly for decades, that had comforted a crying child, that had healed patients, that had rarely been still enough to pursue anything simply for the joy of it. I deserved that watercolor class. I deserved brunch with friends. I deserved a life that wasn't constantly interrupted by other people's emergencies. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Mom, Emma says you can't help with the kids this weekend. Is everything okay? I sighed, recognizing the pattern. Emma would complain, David would intervene, I would capitulate. Not this time. Everything is fine, I wrote back. I have plans this weekend that I don't want to cancel. I wish I'd known earlier about your need for childcare. Perhaps we could have worked something out. His response came quickly. What plans? Emma says it's just some painting class. It's a watercolor workshop I've been looking forward to for weeks, I replied truthfully, though I'd only signed up after returning from Nassau, inspired by my conversations with Thomas about pursuing neglected interests. And Sunday I'm having brunch with friends. These things matter to me, David. The typing dots appeared and disappeared several times before his next message arrived. Okay, I get it. We'll figure something out. It was a small victory, but an important one. I was establishing a new normal in our relationship, one where my plans were given the same weight and consideration as theirs. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner for myself, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Lily and Jake standing on my porch, with David and Emma a few steps behind them. Grandma! Lily exclaimed, throwing her arms around my waist. At 9, she was all gangly limbs and enthusiasm. We came to convince you. Convince me of what, sweetheart? I asked, though I already knew the answer. 7-year-old Jake piped up. To let us stay with you this weekend. Dad says you're too busy, but we told him nobody's too busy for us. I shot David a look over their heads. He at least had the grace to appear slightly embarrassed. The kids really wanted to see you, he explained with a shrug. And they thought maybe if they asked in person, that you'd change your mind. Emma finished, not bothering to hide her smug expression. They miss their grandmother. It was a masterful manipulation, using the children's genuine affection to override my boundaries. In the past, it would have worked instantly. I adored my grandchildren and hated disappointing them. I knelt down to Lily and Jake's level. "I miss you both so much," I said sincerely, "and I would love to spend time with you. How about next weekend? We could go to the Science Museum on Saturday. They have a new dinosaur exhibit I think you'd eye." "Love, Jake. And Lily, we could bake those rainbow cookies you enjoyed last time." Their faces fell slightly, processing the rejection of their immediate request, but brightening at the concrete alternative. "Will you take pictures of the dinosaurs so I can see them right away?" Jake asked. "Of course, and maybe next time. You visit, we can do some painting together. I'm taking a class this weekend to learn how." "I love painting," Lily exclaimed. I stood up, meeting Emma's frustrated gaze. "Next weekend would work well for me. I can pick them up Saturday morning and bring them back Sunday evening, if that suits your schedule." Emma's mouth tightened, recognizing her defeat. "Fine, next weekend." "Actually," David interjected, surprising us both, "maybe Mom's right about hiring a sitter for this weekend. We've been talking about finding someone reliable for ages, and this might be the push we need." He turned to me. "Any recommendations? You mentioned your friend Nancy's granddaughter babysits?" "Melissa, yes. She's in college studying early childhood education. Very responsible. I'll text you her number." Emma looked as though she wanted to protest further, but instead she just sighed dramatically. "I suppose that could work. Come on, kids. Time to go home." After they left, I sat on my porch swing, processing what had just happened. The old guilt was there, but alongside it was something new, a quiet pride in maintaining my boundaries. Despite the pressure, and an awareness that in doing so, I was teaching my family how to treat me, my phone pinged with a message from Thomas. "How was your day?" "Challenging," I replied, "but I'm learning to flex muscles I didn't know I had." The weekend arrived, and I attended my watercolor workshop with a clear conscience. The instructor, a retired art teacher named Eleanor, created a supportive environment where mistakes were celebrated as part of the learning process. By the end of the 6-hour session, I had produced several small paintings, imperfect but joyful experiments in color and form. "You have a good eye," Eleanor told me as we cleaned our brushes. "You should continue with this." "I plan to," I replied, realizing I meant it. The meditative quality of painting, the focus required to really see the world in terms of light and shadow, had transported me in a way few activities ever had. Sunday brunch with Nancy and Carol was filled with laughter and easy conversation. Nancy, my colleague from the hospital, was nearing retirement and full of plans for her next chapter. Carol regaled us with stories from her volunteer work at the animal shelter, including a mishap involving an escaped ferret and the mayor's wife. "So," Carol said, refilling my coffee cup, "how are things with the handsome widower from Portland?" I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. "Thomas is wonderful. He's coming to visit next month." "Ooh, things are getting serious," Nancy teased, gently. "We're taking it slowly," I explained. "But there's definitely something special there. He understands me in a way few people ever have." "Good for you," Carol said warmly. "It's about time you had someone focusing on making you happy for a change." When I returned home that afternoon, I found a small package on my doorstep. Inside was a set of professional quality watercolor pencils and a card in Thomas's handwriting. "For your artistic journey. Can't wait to see your creations next month. Missing you, T." The thoughtfulness of the gift, not just the pencils themselves, but the acknowledgement and encouragement of my newfound interest, brought tears to my eyes. How long had it been since someone had paid such close attention to what brought me joy? My phone rang as I was arranging the pencils in their case. It was David. "Hey, Mom." He sounded unusually hesitant. "Just checking in. How was your weekend?" "It was lovely," I replied honestly. The painting workshop was exactly what I needed, and brunch with my friends was wonderful. "How did things go with the sitter?" "Great, actually. Melissa was fantastic with the kids. They didn't want her to leave." He paused. "Emma's still a bit annoyed, but I think this arrangement might work out well for everyone." "I'm glad to hear that." Another pause. "Listen, Mom, I've been thinking about some things. About how I have been treating you, taking you for granted." I waited, giving him space to continue. "When you went to the Bahamas, it really threw me. Not just because of the dog-sitting thing, but because it made me realize I've never really thought about what you want, what makes you happy. I just assumed you were happy being available for us whenever we needed you. It's a common assumption," I said gently. "And for a long time, I encouraged it. Being needed by you and your family gave me purpose, especially after retirement. But I need more balance now." "I get that, Mom. And I want you to know I support it. I want you to be happy." The sincerity in his voice warmed me. "Thank you, David. That means a lot to me." "So, this Thomas guy, is he good to you?" I laughed at the protective note in his voice. "Yes, very. You'll meet him next month, when he visits. Looking forward to it." He cleared his throat. "Anyway, I should go. We're still on for next weekend with the kids, right?" "Absolutely. I can't wait." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and began experimenting with my new watercolor. Pencils, creating small sketches of the Nassau shoreline from memory. As the colors blended on the paper, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few short weeks. The shift hadn't been without pain. Emma remained resistant, likely viewing my newfound independence as a threat to the convenient arrangement they'd grown accustomed to. There had been other pointed text messages, other attempts at manipulation. But with each boundary I maintained, with each no that didn't result in catastrophe, my confidence grew. I called Thomas that evening, eager to thank him for the gift. "They're perfect," I told him. "I've been playing with them all afternoon." "I'm glad," he replied, his voice warm even through the phone line. "An artist I know recommended them, specifically for beginners who are serious about learning. I've been thinking about what you said in Nassau, about how we always thought we had time for the things we wanted to do. I don't want to make that mistake anymore." "Neither do I," Thomas said softly. "Which is why I've been wondering if 2 months is too long to wait to see you again." My heart quickened. "What did you have in mind?" "I have a conference in Chicago next week. It's only a 2-hour drive from Riverdale, right? I could extend my stay, come see you a bit earlier than planned." The old Sarah would have hesitated, checked her calendar to make sure there were no potential family obligations she might be needed for. The new Sarah simply smiled and said, "I'd love that." The next morning at work, I felt lighter somehow, as if the internal changes I'd been making were finally manifesting physically. Nancy noticed immediately. "Someone's in a good mood," she remarked as we reviewed patient files. "Does it have anything to do with a certain gentleman caller?" I laughed at the old-fashioned term. "Thomas is coming to visit next week. He has a conference in Chicago and decided to extend his trip." "Wonderful. You must bring him to dinner. Paul would love to meet him." Nancy's husband was a retired literature professor with a passion for good conversation. "I'd like that," I replied, touched by the invitation and the way my friends were embracing this new chapter in my life. My phone buzzed with a text, and I glanced down to see Emma's name on the screen. My good mood faltered slightly as I opened the message. "Sarah, we need to talk about next weekend. Something's come up with the children's schedule. Call me when you can." The familiar feeling of disappointment settled in my stomach. I had been looking forward to the museum trip with Lily and Jake, had already purchased the tickets online, but I refused to jump to conclusions. Perhaps there was a legitimate conflict. I finished my shift before calling Emma back, deliberately choosing not to rearrange my workday around her request. "Emma, you wanted to talk about next weekend?" I said when she answered. "Yes," she replied, her voice clipped. "The children have been invited to a classmate's birthday party on Saturday. It's at that new indoor water park, and they're very excited about it. So we'll need to reschedule your time with them." I took a deep breath. "I see. That's disappointing. I already purchased museum tickets for Saturday." "Well, you should have checked with us before making plans," Emma said dismissively. "Children's schedules change all the time." "Which is why we confirmed the plan when you visited last week," I pointed out. "The water park invitation must have come after that." Emma was silent for a moment. "Look, the kids really want to go to this party. All their friends will be there. I'm sure you understand." I did understand. Of course, the children would prefer a water park with friends to a museum with their grandmother. That wasn't the issue. The issue was Emma's assumption that my plans could be casually discarded, that her last-minute change automatically took precedence. "I'm disappointed, but I understand the children want to attend their friend's party," I said carefully. "However, I'd appreciate more notice in the future when plans need to change. My time matters too, Emma." "It's not like you had anything important planned," she muttered. "Just a museum trip." And there it was, the fundamental disconnect. In Emma's worldview, my plans, my interests, my time simply didn't carry the same weight as hers or the children's. "It was important to me," I replied firmly. "Just as I'm sure the water park is important to Lily and Jake. Both can be true simultaneously." "Fine," she sighed. "So can we reschedule for the following weekend?" I consulted my calendar. "Actually, that weekend won't work for me. Thomas will be visiting from Portland." "Thomas? The man you met on vacation? You're choosing to spend time with someone you barely know over your own grandchildren?" The accusation was so unfair it momentarily took my breath away. "I'm not choosing anyone over anyone else, Emma. I'm simply saying that weekend is already committed. How about Sunday afternoon of the water park weekend? We could still do the cookie baking with Lily, and Jake and I could look at dinosaur books together." Emma made a non-committal noise. "I'll have to check our schedule. I'll let you know." After hanging up, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, fighting a wave of sadness. The dynamics with Emma remained challenging, each interaction a potential minefield. But I reminded myself that change takes time. I had spent years training my family to expect constant accommodation from me. It would take more than a few weeks to establish new patterns. That evening, I called my sister Janet, who lived in Seattle with her husband and their grown children. We had never been especially close. Geographical distance and different life paths had created an amiable but somewhat distant relationship. But since my return from Nassau, I had been making more effort to connect with the people in my life, including family members I had neglected while focusing all my energy on David and his family. "Twice in 1 month?" Janet said when she answered. "I'm beginning to think you've been replaced by a very chatty alien." I laughed, just trying to be better about staying in touch. "Well, I approve of this alien invasion. What's new in the exciting life of Sarah Johnson?" I found myself telling her everything: the Nassau trip, Thomas, the boundaries I was establishing with David and Emma, even the watercolor class. Janet listened without interruption, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I'm so proud of you, Sarah," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've worried about you for years. How much you give, how little you receive in return. I tried to talk to you about it a few times, remember?" I did remember. Gentle suggestions that perhaps I was doing too much for David, that I should consider my own needs more. I had always dismissed her concerns, defensively insisting that I was happy with the arrangement, that supporting my son and his family was my purpose in life. I wasn't ready to hear it then, I admitted. I think I was afraid that if I wasn't, constantly making myself indispensable, they wouldn't need me anymore. And if they didn't need me, they might not want you around, Janet finished softly. Oh, Sarah, love shouldn't be conditional on usefulness. I know that now. I'm learning to believe I have value beyond what I can do for others. I paused. It's harder than I expected, though. Old habits die hard. They do. But you're doing it. You're creating a life that's truly yours. And Sarah? I think Mom would be so proud of you too. Our mother had been a woman of quiet strength, raising us largely on her own after our father's early death. She had never complained about the burdens she carried, but neither had she surrendered her personhood to her role as a mother. She had maintained friendships, pursued hobbies, even taken night classes to earn her degree while working full-time. Somehow, in my determination to be a good mother and grandmother, I had lost sight of her example. Thank you, Janet. That means more than you know. After our call, I sat on my porch watching the sunset, thinking about the various threads of my life and how they were rewinding themselves into a new pattern. There was discomfort in the process, yes, but also a profound sense of rightness, as if I was finally aligning with a truth I had long denied. My phone pinged with a text from David. Hey, Mom, Emma tells me there's a schedule conflict with the kids next weekend. I'm sorry about that. How about we bring them over for dinner? One night next week instead? Might be nice for all of us to have a relaxed evening together. It was an olive branch, not a complete solution, but a step in the right direction. And it acknowledged my disappointment rather than dismissing it. I'd love that, I replied. How about Wednesday? I could make that chicken dish everyone likes. Perfect. We'll be there. And Mom, I really am trying to do better. I smiled at the screen. I know you are, sweetheart. So am I. Another text arrived, this one from Thomas with a photo of his ticket to Chicago and the rental car reservation that would bring him to Riverdale afterward. Counting down the days, he wrote. As night fell, I felt a peaceful certainty settle over me. The path forward might not be smooth, but it was undeniably mine. The woman who had impulsively booked a trip to the Bahamas rather than dog sit was not an aberration or a temporary rebellion. She was the authentic Sarah Johnson, emerging at last from behind decades of excessive self-sacrifice and misplaced priorities. I went inside and updated my calendar, noting David's family dinner on Wednesday and Thomas's arrival the following week. Between those events, I added watercolor practice, 2 hours, and coffee with Eleanor from painting class. Small commitments to myself, but significant ones. As I got ready for bed, I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed different somehow. There was a clarity in her eyes, a quiet confidence in her posture that hadn't been there before. The Nassau tan had faded, but something more permanent had taken its place, a kind of inner illumination that came from finally honoring my own worth. There you are, I whispered to my reflection. I've been looking for you for a very long time. Thomas's rental car pulled into my driveway exactly when he said it would, punctuality being one of the many qualities I'd come to appreciate about him. I watched from the window as he stepped out, looking slightly travel-worn but smiling, as he collected his suitcase from the trunk. My heart did a small, ridiculous flutter that reminded me of feelings I'd thought long past. I opened the door before he could knock, and he paused on the porch, his eyes taking me in. "You look even more beautiful than I remembered," he said. And though the words were simple, the sincerity in his voice made them feel profound. We stood there for a moment, suddenly shy after weeks of easy phone conversations. Then he set down his suitcase and opened his arms. I stepped into his embrace, the warmth and solidity of him reminding me that this was real, not just a pleasant fantasy I'd constructed during our time apart. "Welcome to Riverdale," I said when we finally pulled apart. "How was the drive from Chicago?" "Uneventful, just the way I like my road trips." He picked up his suitcase, though I did stop at a roadside farm stand and bought these. He pulled out a small bouquet of sunflowers, slightly rumpled from their journey, but vibrant nonetheless. "They reminded me of you," he explained. Bright and unexpected. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, stopping during his long drive to find flowers he thought I'd like, touched me deeply. I took the sunflowers, inhaling their subtle fragrance. "They're perfect," I said. "Come in and get settled. You must be exhausted." I had prepared the guest room for him, keeping things proper despite the growing intimacy of our relationship. We were both old-fashioned enough to appreciate a certain slowness, a deliberate building of connection before rushing into physical entanglement. After showing him to his room and giving him time to freshen up, I served the dinner I'd prepared. A simple but carefully crafted meal of herb-roasted chicken, seasonal vegetables from the farmer's market, and fresh bread from Riverdale's best bakery. "This is wonderful," Thomas said as we ate. "I've been living on hotel food and conference coffee for 3 days. This feels like coming home." The word home hung between us, weighted with implication. I found myself studying his face in the soft light of my dining room, the laugh, lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the thoughtful set of his mouth. There was a steadiness to him that resonated with something deep within me. "I'm glad you're here," I said simply. "So am I." He reached across the table to take my hand. The conference was actually quite fascinating, all about sustainable urban planning, but the whole time, I kept thinking about getting here, about seeing you. We talked late into the evening, comfortable in my living room with cups of tea, sharing stories and perspectives, laughing often. When he finally retreated to the guest room around midnight, he kissed me gently at the door. "Good night, Sarah. Thank you for today." I fell asleep smiling, looking forward to showing him my town, my life the next day. Morning brought the first complication of his visit. I was making breakfast when my phone rang, David's ringtone. "Mom, we have a situation," he said without preamble when I answered. Emma's sister had some kind of emergency appendectomy last night, and Emma's driving to Cincinnati to help with the kids. I have meetings I can't reschedule, and our sitter Melissa is out of town. I hate to ask, especially last minute, but is there any way you could watch Lily and Jake for the day? I'd bring them over in about an hour and pick them up by dinner. My first impulse was to say yes automatically. It was a genuine emergency. After all, not just poor planning or entitlement. But Thomas was here, his visit carefully planned and anticipated. I had promised to show him Riverdale, to introduce him to my friends Nancy and Paul at dinner that evening. "David, I have a guest visiting from out of town," I said carefully. "Thomas, the man I met in Nassau. He's here for the weekend." "Oh." David sounded genuinely surprised, as if he'd forgotten about Thomas entirely. "Right. You mentioned that. Is there anyone else who could help? What about your neighbor Stephanie? Lily and Jake play with her children often, don't they?" "I hadn't thought of that," David admitted. "I just automatically called you. Old habits, I guess." I felt a small surge of pride at his self-awareness. I understand this is a real emergency, and I want to help. What if Thomas and I take the children for part of the day? We could pick them up after lunch, around 1, and show them around town. That would give you time for your most important meetings. "That would be amazing, Mom. Are you sure your friend won't mind?" "Let me ask him." I lowered the phone and turned to Thomas, who had just entered the kitchen. "My son has an emergency childcare situation. His wife had to go out of town suddenly, and he has important meetings. Would you mind if we hosted my grandchildren for part of the afternoon? I know it's not what we planned." Thomas smiled warmly. I'd love to meet your grandchildren. They're important to you, so I want to know them. Relief and gratitude washed over me. I returned to the phone. Thomas is fine with it. We'll pick them up at 1. Thank you, Mom. This means a lot. After hanging up, I turned to Thomas with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry our plans are changing. I'm trying to establish healthier boundaries with my family, but this seemed like a genuine need. Thomas came over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, a gesture so tender it made my breath catch. Sarah, I'm here to be part of your real life, not some artificial vacation from it. Your family is part of who you are. Besides, he grinned, I've been looking forward to meeting these grandchildren you talk about so fondly. His understanding calmed the anxiety that had been building in my chest, the worry that he might see my family obligations as burdensome, that the messiness of my real life might scare him away. We spent the morning exploring Riverdale's charming downtown, hand in hand like teenagers. I showed him my favorite bookstore, the cafe where I often met Nancy for coffee, the park where I walked on spring evenings. It felt strangely intimate, sharing these ordinary pieces of my life with him. At 1 o'clock, we arrived at David's house in Oakwood Estates. Even after years of visiting, I still felt a twinge of discomfort at the opulence of the neighborhood. The manicured lawns, the luxury cars in driveways, the houses 3 times the size of my modest ranch home. Thomas let out a low whistle as we pulled up. Quite a place, he remarked. David does well, I said, feeling oddly defensive. He works hard. I'm sure he does, Thomas replied neutrally. David opened the door before we could ring the bell, looking harried in his business casual attire. Thank you both for doing this, he said, shaking Thomas's hand with genuine warmth. I'm David. You must be Thomas. I've heard a lot about you. All good things, I hope, Thomas replied with an easy smile. The best, David assured him. Mom seems happier than I've seen her in years. That counts for a lot in my book. I felt a rush of affection for my son in that moment. For his graciousness, for his apparent acceptance of Thomas, for his observation about my happiness. Lily and Jake barreled down the stairs, excited for an unexpected adventure with their grandmother and curious about the stranger accompanying her. Are you Grandma's boyfriend? Jake asked Thomas bluntly as we settled the children into my car. Thomas caught my eye, amusement dancing in his expression. I'm a friend of your grandmother's, yes. Is that okay with you? Jake considered this seriously. Do you like dinosaurs? I find them fascinating, especially the feathered ones they've discovered in recent years. Jake's eyes widened. Dinosaurs had feathers? Some did. They're related to modern birds, you know. And just like that, Thomas had won over my grandson. Lily took longer to warm up, watching Thomas with cautious interest as we drove to the Natural History Museum, a compromise destination that would engage the children while still showcasing one of Riverdale's attractions to Thomas. The afternoon unfolded better than I could have hoped. Thomas proved to be wonderful with the children, patient with Jake's endless questions about prehistoric life, and gently drawing out shy Lily with genuine interest in her stories about school and friends. By the time we stopped for ice cream afterward, both children were completely comfortable with him, even competing for his attention. Your grandma tells me you're quite the artist, Thomas said to Lily as she savored her chocolate cone. Lily shrugged. I like drawing. Ms. Peters says I have good imagination. I'd love to see your work sometime, Thomas told her. I'm not very good at drawing myself, but I appreciate people who can create beautiful things. Lily studied him for a moment. I could teach you. It's not that hard. I would be honored to learn from you, Thomas replied with perfect seriousness, and I watched my granddaughter bloom under his respectful attention. When we returned to David's house at 5, both children were reluctant to say goodbye. Can Thomas come next time we visit you, Grandma? Jake asked as he hugged me. We'll see, I replied, catching Thomas's eye over Jake's head. He was smiling, clearly pleased by the children's acceptance. David arrived home just as we were leaving. "How did it go?" he asked, taking in the children's excited chatter and happy expressions. "Wonderfully," I assured him. "We had a great time at the museum." "Thomas showed me dinosaurs with feathers," Jake exclaimed. "And he said I'm a real artist," Lily added, importantly. David raised his eyebrows, looking from his children to Thomas with new appreciation. "Sounds like you were a hit." Thomas shrugged modestly. "You have terrific kids. They made it easy." As we drove away, heading to dinner with Nancy and Paul, I felt a curious sense of completion, as if separate parts of my life were finally connecting in a meaningful way. "Your grandchildren are delightful," Thomas said as we navigated the early evening traffic. "Smart, curious, kind. You must be very proud." "I am," I agreed. "Thank you for today, for being so good with them, for understanding when our plans changed." He reached over to squeeze my hand briefly. "That's what real relationships are about, Sarah. Flexibility, adaptation, making room for what matters to the other person. Real relationships." The words echoed in my mind as we continued to Nancy and Paul's for dinner. Was that what this was becoming? Something real and substantial? Not just a pleasant interlude or a reaction to years of emotional neglect? The evening, with my friends, confirmed the growing certainty in my heart. Thomas fit seamlessly into the gathering, his intellectual curiosity engaging Paul's academic mind, while his warmth and humor connected easily with Nancy's more practical nature. Watching him charm my friends, seeing how effortlessly he integrated into this corner of my world, I felt a surge of something that might have been happiness, except it was deeper, more substantial, more like contentment. Later that night, as we sat on my porch enjoying the mild evening air, Thomas took my hand. "I've been thinking about something," he said, his tone serious but gentle. "These past few days with you have been wonderful, Sarah. Better than I imagined. Being here, meeting your family and friends, seeing where you live and work, it's made everything more real somehow." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "For me too." "The thing is," he continued, "Portland and Riverdale are still a long way apart. This long-distance arrangement? It's workable for now, but eventually..." My pulse quickened. Eventually? Eventually, one of us would need to make a bigger commitment, a bigger change. He turned to face me directly. "I don't want to rush you, Sarah. What you're doing, reclaiming your independence, establishing healthier patterns with your family, it's important work. But I want you to know that I'm serious about us, about seeing where this could go." The significance of his words settled over me like a warm blanket. He wasn't making demands or presenting ultimatums. He was simply letting me know that he saw a future for us, one that would eventually require decisions and compromises. "I'm serious about us too," I said softly. "But you're right. I'm still finding my footing in this new version of my life, learning who I am when I'm not defined by what I do for others." "I understand," he assured me. "There's no hurry. I just wanted you to know where I stand." I leaned in and kissed him, a gesture that felt both revolutionary and completely natural. "Thank you for that, for being clear, for being patient." That night, as I lay in bed listening to the quiet sounds of Thomas preparing for sleep in the guest room down the hall, I allowed myself to imagine a future different from anything I'd envisioned before, one where I might share my daily life with a partner who saw me clearly and valued me completely. The weekend passed in a blur of simple pleasures: a picnic in Riverside Park, dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant, long conversations on my porch swing. Thomas fit so naturally into my world that by Sunday evening, it was difficult to remember what my routine had been like before his arrival. As we sat together on my sofa on his last night, my phone pinged with a text message. I glanced at it briefly, then stiffened as I read the content. "Everything okay?" Thomas asked, noticing my reaction. "It's Emma," I said, rereading the message, with growing unease. "She's back from Cincinnati and wants to meet tomorrow to discuss some concerns about recent developments. Whatever that means. Any idea what she's referring to?" I sighed. "Probably you, or more specifically, my relationship with you and how it might affect her carefully ordered world." Thomas frowned slightly. "Is that likely to be a problem?" "With Emma?" "Possibly." I set the phone down. "She's particular about appearances, about control, about maintaining what she considers the proper family image. And where do I fit into that image?" I thought about Emma's likely perspective, her surprise and potential discomfort at her mother-in-law developing a romantic relationship after years of being conveniently unattached and available. "You don't," I admitted. "At least, not in any way she would have anticipated. I've been the reliable grandmother, the emergency backup, the occasional financial resource, not someone with her own romantic life and priorities." Thomas's expression remained neutral, but I sensed concern beneath his calm exterior. "What will you tell her?" "The truth, that I've met someone important to me, someone who respects my boundaries and values my happiness, that this doesn't diminish my love for my grandchildren or my son, but it does mean my availability and priorities are changing." He smiled then, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear in the gesture I'd come to love. "Want me to come with you? Moral support?" I considered it briefly before shaking my head. "I think this is a conversation I need to have on my own, but thank you for offering." That night, I dreamt of standing on a high wire, trying to balance while figures below called demands up to me. David, Emma, the grandchildren, all with their hands outstretched, all expecting me to maintain perfect equilibrium while meeting their needs. Then Thomas appeared on the platform ahead, not calling out or demanding, just waiting patiently, his presence offering a different kind of stability. I woke feeling strangely calm, despite the confrontation I anticipated with Emma. Thomas left, early for his drive back to Chicago, kissing me goodbye with a promise to call that evening. "Remember," he said at the door, his hands warm on my shoulders, "you're entitled to your own happiness, Sarah. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." With those words echoing in my mind, I drove to the small cafe where Emma had suggested we meet. She was already there, immaculately dressed in a sleek pantsuit despite the casual setting, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. I saw her assessing my appearance as I approached. The new blouse I'd purchased last week, the subtle makeup I'd started wearing more regularly, the confidence in my stride that hadn't been there before Nassau. "Sarah," she greeted me, her tone polite but cool. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "How is your sister doing?" "Better. The surgery went well." She sipped her latte before continuing. "Lily and Jake had a lot to say about their adventure with you and your, friend on Friday. And there it was, the real purpose of this meeting, barely 5 sentences in." "Thomas," I supplied. "Yes, we had a lovely afternoon at the Natural History Museum. The children seemed to enjoy themselves." Emma set her cup down precisely. "They were quite taken with him, particularly Lily, which surprised me. She's usually so reserved with strangers." "Thomas has a gift for connecting with people," said simply. "He was very respectful of the children, very attentive to their interests." Emma studied me for a moment. "David mentioned you met this man in the Bahamas during your impromptu vacation?" The slight emphasis on impromptu conveyed volumes about her opinion of my trip, still viewed as a bizarre aberration rather than a meaningful choice. Yes, that's right. And now he's visiting you here. Things seem to be moving rather quickly. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I didn't owe Emma explanations or justifications for my personal choices. Thomas and I connect on many levels. We're both at similar stages in life, both interested in exploring what this relationship might become. Emma's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. Relationship? Sarah, you barely know this man. You met him on a beach somewhere a few months ago. Don't you think you're being a bit impulsive? The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. The same tone she might use with a teenager making questionable dating choices, not with a woman of 58 with decades of life experience. Actually, Emma, I've been quite deliberate, I replied evenly. Thomas and I have spent hours talking, getting to know each other's values, histories, perspectives. We're both adults with enough life experience to recognize something worthwhile when we find it. I'm just concerned, she said, leaning forward slightly. This behavior, the sudden trip, now this rushed relationship, it's not like you. David, and I worry that perhaps you're going through something. A phase of some kind. The implication that my choices represented some kind of psychological crisis rather than healthy growth was exactly the kind of manipulation I had expected. I appreciate your concern, I said, keeping my voice steady. But it's misplaced. I'm not having a crisis or going through a phase. I'm simply living my life more authentically now, making choices that prioritize my well-being alongside everyone else's. Emma's expression suggested she remained unconvinced. The children adore you, Sarah. We all do. But introducing a strange man into their lives without consulting us, that puts David and me in an awkward position. The subtle shift in tactics was impressive, moving from concern for me to concern for the children, a subject she knew would touch my heart. Thomas isn't a strange man, Emma. He's someone I care about deeply, someone I've chosen to include in my life. The children met him because of an emergency childcare situation that you and David requested. He was kind, appropriate, and engaging with Lily and Jake. Still, she persisted, as their parents, we need to be consulted about who spends time with them. I felt a flicker of genuine anger. Are you suggesting I can't be trusted to ensure my grandchildren's safety? That my judgment is suddenly impaired? Of course not, Emma backpedaled slightly. It's just that these changes in your behavior are concerning. First refusing to dog sit, then the impromptu vacation, now this relationship. It feels like you're pulling away from the family. And there it was, the real fear underneath all the manipulation and concern trolling. Emma was afraid of losing control, of losing the predictable, accommodating mother-in-law who had been such a convenient resource. I'm not pulling away from the family, Emma. I'm establishing a healthier relationship with all of you. One where my needs and choices are given the same consideration as everyone else's. But what about our needs? She countered. The children miss seeing you as often. David misses your Sunday dinners. Even Max the dog asks where you are. I had to suppress a smile at the mention of the dog, the catalyst for all these changes. I'm still here, I assured her. Still available for planned visits, still loving all of you. But yes, my availability has changed. I have other commitments now, other relationships that matter to me. Just as you and David prioritize your careers, your social obligations, your personal interests alongside family responsibilities, I'm now doing the same. Emma sat back, a slight frown creasing her forehead. It's different. We're raising children. We have careers to maintain. And I have a life to live, I replied simply. One that includes being a grandmother, but isn't limited to that role. We sat in silence for a moment, the cafe bustling around us. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice softer. David seems to think this is good for you. these changes. I was surprised by this revelation, that David had defended my choices to his wife, perhaps even advocated for my perspective. It is good for me, I confirmed. Finding balance, pursuing interests I've neglected, opening myself to new relationships. These are all positive developments, Emma. They don't diminish my love for you and David and the children. If anything, they make that love healthier, less dependent, less fraught with unspoken expectations. She nodded slowly, though I could see she wasn't fully convinced. And this Thomas person, he's someone you see staying in your life? Someone we'll need to accommodate? The word choice was telling. Accommodate rather than welcome or accept. But it was a start. Yes, I believe so. Thomas is important to me. I hope you and David will give him a chance to be more than just my friend from the Bahamas in your minds. Emma gathered her purse, signaling the end of our conversation. Well, I suppose we'll have to see how things develop. David suggested inviting both of you to dinner sometime soon. Perhaps next weekend, if you're available. It wasn't enthusiastic acceptance, but it was a concession. One I suspected came more from David than from Emma herself. Still, I appreciated the effort. We'd like that, I said, rising from my chair. Thank you for suggesting it. As we walked to our cars, Emma paused. Sarah, just be careful, all right? You deserve to be happy, but don't rush into anything. The concern in her voice seemed genuine, if still tinged with condescension. I nodded, recognizing that in her own way, Emma was trying to find a new equilibrium in our relationship. I'm being careful with my heart, I assured her. Just as I'm being careful with my time, my energy, my boundaries. It's all part of the same process. Learning to value myself as much as I value others. Driving home, I felt a curious mixture of weariness and triumph. The conversation with Emma hadn't been easy, but I had maintained my position without anger or defensiveness. More importantly, I had articulated my new understanding of myself and my life in a way that felt authentic and powerful. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway, Thomas calling as promised. How did it go with Emma? He asked after we exchanged greetings. About as expected, I replied, settling onto my porch swing. She's concerned about my sudden personality change, worried about the impact on the family, not entirely comfortable with your presence in my life. And how do you feel about all that? I considered the question seriously. Validated, actually. Her resistance confirms that I'm making real changes, not just symbolic ones. And there were small victories. David apparently spoke up for me, and they've invited us both to dinner next weekend. Progress, Thomas commented. Progress, I agreed. Slow, sometimes uncomfortable, but real. As we talked, sharing details of our respective days, I felt a deepening certainty that the path I had chosen, beginning with that impulsive decision to go to Nassau instead of dog-sitting, was leading me exactly where I needed to be. Not away from my family, as Emma feared, but toward a more complete version of myself who could love them better, more honestly, more healthily. The confrontation with Emma, challenging as it had been, had only strengthened my resolve to continue this journey of reclaiming my life, one boundary, one choice, one act of self-respect at a time. The dinner at David and Emma's was scheduled. For Saturday evening, and in the days leading up to it, I found myself filled with an unexpected nervous energy. This would be the first time Thomas and I would appear as a couple at a formal family gathering. A statement of sorts, a declaration that our relationship was significant enough to navigate the complexities of family dynamics. What should I bring? Thomas asked during our nightly phone call on Wednesday. Wine, dessert, a peace offering for Emma? I laughed at his wry tone. Wine would be perfect. Emma prefers dry reds, but don't go overboard on the price. She'll look it up and If it's too expensive, she'll think you're showing off. If it's too cheap, she'll think you're not making an effort. That's quite a tightrope, he observed. Is she always this? Evaluative? Always, I confirmed. Emma's family places enormous value on appearances and social standing. It's reflexive for her at this point. And David? How does he feel about all that? I considered the question, realizing I'd never really thought about it explicitly. He wants to please her, I said finally. And he enjoys the lifestyle, certainly. But I think some of the social climbing makes him uncomfortable. He's more genuine than Emma, less concerned with how things look and more with how they actually are. He takes after his mother that way, Thomas said warmly. The observation touched me deeply. Not just the compliment itself, but the recognition that Thomas saw connections between David and me that I sometimes overlooked, especially in recent years when our relationship had become strained. Saturday arrived with perfect fall weather, crisp and sunny. I spent more time than usual choosing my outfit, eventually settling on a sapphire blue dress I'd purchased during a shopping trip with Nancy the previous week. It was more stylish than my usual attire, with a flattering cut and color that made me feel confident and attractive. Thomas arrived at my house at 5, handsomely dressed in charcoal slacks and a navy blazer, a bottle of wine in hand. Middle-of-the-road price point, dry red, not too pretentious label, he announced with mock solemnity. Did I pass the test? With flying colors, I assured him, laughing, but the real test awaits us. As we drove to Oakwood Estates, Thomas reached over to squeeze my hand. Whatever happens tonight, remember this is about us showing up authentically. As a couple, not about winning Emma's approval. His words calmed the flutter of anxiety in my chest. He was right. The purpose of this evening wasn't to convince Emma to approve of our relationship or to accommodate her expectations. It was simply to be present together, to share this aspect of our lives with my family. David greeted us warmly at the door, taking the wine with genuine appreciation. Come in, come in. The kids are excited to see you both." Inside, Lily and Jake rushed forward, their initial enthusiasm directed primarily at Thomas, much to my amusement. "Did you bring pictures of the feathered dinosaurs?" Jake asked immediately. "Even better," Thomas replied, pulling a small package from his pocket. "A book about them. Your grandmother helped me pick it out." Jake's eyes widened with delight as he accepted the gift. Lily hung back slightly, more reserved than her brother, until Thomas produced a second package. "And for the artist in the family," he said, handing it to her. "Just some colored pencils I thought you might enjoy." Lily's face lit up as she opened the simple but thoughtful gift. "These are the professional kind," she said with awe, "like real artists use." "Because you are a real artist," Thomas told her seriously. I caught David watching this exchange, a thoughtful expression on his face. He caught my eye and gave a small nod of approval. Emma emerged from the kitchen, elegant in a cream-colored ensemble that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She greeted us with polite reserve, accepting Thomas's compliments on her home with practiced grace. "Sarah mentions you're an architect," she said, as she led us to the living room where drinks were arranged. "Retired now, I understand?" "Semi-retired," Thomas corrected gently. "I still consult on special projects, mostly sustainable urban development initiatives. But yes, I've stepped back from full-time practice." "How interesting," Emma replied with the exact intonation that suggested it was anything but. "And you live in Portland? That's quite a distance from Riverdale." The questioning had begun, Emma's subtle way of probing for weaknesses or complications in our relationship. "It is," Thomas acknowledged calmly. "Sarah and I are navigating the distance thoughtfully. Modern technology helps, of course, but there's no substitute for being together in person." "Hence these visits back and forth," I added, accepting the glass of wine David offered me. "We're making it work." For now, Emma noted, with just enough emphasis to underscore the implied impermanence. Before Thomas could respond, Lily approached and tugged at his sleeve. "Would you like to see my art room?" "Dad made it for me in the upstairs study." Emma started to intervene. "Lily, the adults are talking." But David gently intercepted. "Why don't you show Thomas your artwork while Emma and I finish preparing?" "Dinner? Mom can help you give the tour." It was a diplomatic move, separating the potential combatants while creating space for Thomas to connect with Lily in a way that showcased his genuine interest in her. Upstairs, Lily proudly displayed her creative space. A corner of the former study now equipped with an easel, art supplies neatly organized in colorful bins, and drawings covering a dedicated wall. "These are remarkable," Thomas said, examining her work with genuine attention. "You have a wonderful sense of color and movement." Lily beamed under his praise. "Grandma says I got the artist talent from her mom, my great-grandma. She painted too." "That's right," I confirmed, touched that Lily remembered these family stories. "My mother was quite talented, though she rarely had time to develop her skills. She worked 2 jobs most of her life." Thomas glanced at me, understanding the connection to my own deferred dreams and recent commitment to pursue them. "It's never too late to honor that creative legacy," he said, speaking to Lily but looking at me. "Sometimes the most meaningful art comes after we've lived enough life to have something important to express." Dinner proceeded more smoothly than I had anticipated. David made consistent efforts to engage Thomas in conversation, asking thoughtful questions about his career, his interests, his perspectives on various topics. Emma remained reserved but civilly attentive, while the children provided natural breaks in the adult conversation with their own observations and questions. As David served dessert, a store-bought cheesecake that Emma presented as if she'd made it herself, he cleared his throat slightly. "So, we have some news," he announced, glancing at Emma, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "We're planning a family vacation to Yellowstone next summer, and we'd like both of you to join us." The invitation caught me completely by surprise. In all the years since David and Emma had married, they had never included me in a family vacation. I had been the person who watched the house or took care of Max when they traveled, not someone who accompanied them. "Both of us?" I echoed, wanting to be certain I understood correctly. "Yes," Emma said, her voice carefully neutral. "We thought it might be nice for the children to experience a national park with both their grandmother and Thomas along, if you're still together." By then, of course. The qualifier was pure Emma, but the invitation itself represented a significant concession, an acknowledgement, however reluctant, that Thomas might be a continuing presence in our family constellation. "That's very thoughtful," Thomas replied, smoothly, ignoring the implication that our relationship might be temporary. "I love Yellowstone. I'd be honored to join your family adventure, if Sarah would like that." "I would," I said, finding my voice. "Very much. Thank you for including us." After dinner, as Thomas helped David clear the table, an offer that clearly impressed my son, who was accustomed to being the only male managing such tasks, Emma approached me in the kitchen. "He seems decent," she said quietly, arranging dessert plates in the dishwasher with methodical precision. Coming from Emma, this qualified as effusive praise. I nodded, not wanting to overreact and trigger her retreat to cooler evaluation. "He is," I confirmed simply. "Very decent. The children like him. Yes, they do." Emma rearranged a fork that wasn't aligned with the others. "David thinks I've been too judgmental about your recent changes. He says you seem happier, more energetic than he's seen you in years." Again, I simply nodded, giving her space to continue working through her thoughts. "I suppose what matters is that you're still present for the family," she said finally. "Still the same reliable Sarah underneath all these adjustments. It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was movement in that direction, an olive branch of sorts, extended with Emma's characteristic caution. "I am the same person," I assured her, "just more complete, more balanced, and that makes me a better grandmother, a better mother-in-law than when I was stretching myself too thin trying to be available for everything." She considered this, then offered what might have been the beginning of a genuine smile. "Well, the Yellowstone trip is still 9 months away. Plenty of time to coordinate schedules." It was as close to enthusiastic inclusion as I was likely to get from Emma, and I accepted it with appropriate gratitude. Driving home that evening, Thomas and I dissected the dinner in detail, laughing about Emma's thinly veiled interrogation techniques and reflecting on the children's immediate, uncomplicated acceptance. "David really impressed me," Thomas commented. "He's making a conscious effort to support your changes, even when I suspect his wife would prefer he didn't." "He's grown a lot these past few months," I agreed. "It's as if seeing me set boundaries and prioritize my needs has given him permission to examine his own patterns more carefully." The observation felt profound, the recognition that my personal growth wasn't happening in isolation, but creating ripples that affected everyone around me, sometimes in unexpected ways. The following week brought another significant development. Eleanor, my watercolor instructor, approached me after class with an unexpected proposal. "The community center is organizing a small art exhibition for emerging local artists," she explained. "Nothing fancy, just a weekend showcase in the main hall. I'd like to include 3 of your pieces." I stared at her in disbelief. "Mine? But I've only been painting for a few months." "And showing remarkable progress," she countered. "Besides, the exhibition is specifically meant to encourage new artists, to celebrate beginnings rather than polished expertise." The old Sarah would have demurred immediately, making self-deprecating comments about her modest abilities and refusing such public exposure. But the new Sarah, the one who had walked alone on Nassau beaches and established boundaries with her family and opened herself to love again, considered the opportunity thoughtfully. "I'd be honored," I said finally, though terrified as well. Eleanor laughed. "That's the appropriate response. Art is always an act of vulnerability. The exhibition is the first weekend in December. You have time to select and prepare your pieces." That evening, I called Thomas to share the news, his immediate enthusiasm bolstering my courage. "I'm booking my flight right now," he declared. "I wouldn't miss your first exhibition for anything." "It's hardly an exhibition," I protested, "just a community center showcase." "It's important," he insisted. "Your work being recognized, displayed publicly. That's a milestone worth celebrating." His support touched me deeply, as did his immediate commitment to being present for this step in my journey. We had settled into a rhythm of visits every few weeks, alternating between Portland and Riverdale, gradually learning the contours of each other's daily lives rather than just sharing vacation adventures or weekend highlights. The growing seriousness of our relationship raised inevitable questions about the future, questions we had begun discussing with increasing openness during our nightly calls. "I've been thinking about my house," Thomas said one evening in early November. "It's larger than I need, especially now that I'm traveling to Riverdale so frequently." "Are you considering selling it?" I asked, curious where this was heading. "Perhaps, or renting it out for a while, as a trial." He paused. "Sarah, we've been dancing around this topic for weeks. At some point, if this relationship continues developing as we both hope, one of us will need to relocate." The reality of this truth settled over me. The recognition that our current arrangement, while workable for now, had built-in limitations. Someone would eventually need to make a significant geographic change. "I know," I acknowledged. "I've been thinking about it too." "And?" he prompted gently. I considered the question seriously. Riverdale had been my home for decades. It held My history, my memories, my established connections with friends like Nancy and Carol. It was where David and his family lived, where I could be present for Lily and Jake's childhood milestones. But it also represented patterns and expectations that I had only recently begun to restructure. In Riverdale, I would always be defined first as David's mother, as the former nurse from St. Mary's, as the widow who lived in the same house for 30 years. I'm not ready to make that decision yet, I said honestly, but I'm open to considering all possibilities, including relocating to Portland someday. That's all I needed to hear, Thomas replied, his voice warm. That you're open to the possibility. There's no rush, Sarah. We're building something worth taking time to get right. The weeks leading up to the community center exhibition were filled with a flurry of creative activity. With Eleanor's guidance, I selected 3 watercolor pieces for display: a sunrise over the Bahamas painted from memory, a study of autumn leaves from Riverside Park, and a small portrait of Lily absorbed in drawing at her easel. These show remarkable range, Eleanor commented as we prepared them for framing. The technical elements need refinement, certainly, but they each capture something essential: a quality of light, a moment of concentration, the memory of a significant place. I found myself spending more and more time at my small painting desk by the living room window, losing hours to the meditative process of observing, mixing colors, applying brush to paper. There was something deeply satisfying about creating, something tangible, something that existed solely because I had chosen to bring it into being. Nancy and Carol took turns visiting to check on my progress, offering encouragement and practical help with framing and presentation. Even David stopped by one evening, curious about this new facet of his mother's life. "I had no idea you were interested in painting," he remarked, studying the pieces I'd selected for the exhibition. "These are really good, Mom." "I'm just beginning," I said, though I accepted the compliment without the automatic self-deprecation that would have been my response a few months earlier. There's so much to learn, so many techniques to master. "Still," he insisted, lingering over the portrait of Lily, "you've captured something special here, something true." His observation echoed Eleanor's, the recognition that beyond technical proficiency, my work contained an authentic perspective, a genuine vision. It was one of the most meaningful compliments I had ever received. The night before the exhibition, I found myself unexpectedly anxious. Thomas was arriving the following morning, and the showcase would open that evening. Friends had promised to attend, and David had arranged for a sitter so he and Emma could make an appearance. My work, my perspective, my voice, would be on public display for the first time in my life. I called Janet in Seattle, needing the particular comfort of sisterly understanding. "I'm terrified," I admitted when she answered. "What if everyone hates my paintings? What if they're just being kind because I'm new at this? What if—" "Sarah," Janet interrupted firmly. "Stop. Take a breath. Now listen to me. This isn't really about whether people like your paintings or not." "It's not?" "No. It's about you doing something purely for yourself, something creative and personal, and then having the courage to share it publicly. That's the victory here. Not external validation, but the internal journey from the woman who thought dog-sitting was her only option to the woman who paints what moves her and displays it proudly. Her perspective shifted something inside me, a release of the anxious need for approval that had driven so many of my choices for so long. "You're right," I said, feeling calmer. "This is about my journey, not other people's reactions." "Exactly. Though for what it's worth, I bet your paintings are wonderful. You always had a good eye, even as a child. Remember those detailed drawings you used to make of Mom's garden?" I did remember. Hours spent carefully observing and recording the shapes of leaves, the patterns of petals, the subtle gradations of color in a single bloom. Those childhood drawings had been a form of meditation, a way of connecting deeply with the world around me. Somehow I had forgotten that part of myself until the watercolor class reawakened it. "Thank you, Janet," I said sincerely. "For the perspective, for the reminder." "That's what sisters are for," she replied warmly. "Now go get some rest. Tomorrow, you become a publicly exhibited artist." The exhibition evening arrived with perfect crystalline November weather. Cold enough for scarves and gloves, but clear and bright with early stars visible above the community center's modest building. Thomas had arrived that morning, bringing with him a small gift box containing delicate silver earrings shaped like artists' palettes. "For the artist on her opening night," he said as I opened them. Now, as we approached the community center, together, his steady presence beside me calmed the remaining butterflies in my stomach. "Ready?" he asked, squeezing my hand. "As I'll ever be," I replied. Inside, the main hall had been transformed with portable display panels, track lighting, and a small refreshment table. About 20 artists were featured, each with a dedicated space and a small placard listing their name and background. I found mine and stood there a moment, strangely moved by seeing my name, Sarah Johnson, printed professionally alongside the simple description, "Emerging watercolorist exploring. Light, memory, and connection." Eleanor approached, elegant in a flowing artistic ensemble that made me smile. "Your work looks wonderful in this lighting," she said. "The frames we chose were perfect." People began to arrive, other artists with their families and friends, community members interested in local art, curious passers-by. Nancy and Paul came early, followed by Carol and her newest gentleman friend from the senior center. To my surprise, even Dr. Matthews, my former supervisor from the hospital, appeared. With his wife. "Wouldn't miss it," he said gruffly when I expressed my surprise. "Always knew you had depths beyond medicine, Johnson." The most affecting moment came when David arrived, not just with Emma, as expected, but with Lily and Jake as well. "We couldn't find a sitter," he explained with a wink that told me this had been deliberate. "Besides, Lily insisted on seeing her portrait in a real exhibition." Lily stood transfixed before the small watercolor, seeing herself through my eyes, concentrated, creative, lost in the flow of imagination. "Is that really how I look when I'm drawing?" she asked softly. "That's how I see you," I confirmed. "Completely absorbed, completely yourself." She considered this thoughtfully. "I like being seen that way." The simple statement contained multitudes, the universal human desire to be truly seen, to be witnessed in moments of authentic engagement with life. That my granddaughter felt this way about my perception of her seemed like the highest possible artistic achievement. Throughout the evening, I circulated with Thomas at my side, explaining my process to interested viewers, accepting compliments with growing ease, watching as small red sold dots were placed beside 2 of my 3 paintings. "Someone bought my work," I whispered to Thomas, astonished, after Eleanor informed me that both the sunrise and the autumn leaves had been purchased. "Of course they did," he replied with a proud smile. "They're beautiful, authentic expressions of your unique vision." As the evening wound down, I found myself standing with David near the refreshment table. Emma was showing Jake the geometric sculptures across the hall, while Thomas had been drawn into conversation with Paul about architectural preservation. "I'm really proud of you, Mom," David said quietly. "Not just for the paintings, though. They're genuinely good. But for all of it. For Bahamas instead of dog-sitting. For Thomas. For watercolor classes. For standing your ground with us when we were being selfish. For becoming more fully yourself." His words moved me deeply. This acknowledgement from my son that the changes I had made, however disruptive to established patterns, were fundamentally positive and worthy of celebration. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means everything to, I've been doing some thinking of my own," he continued, his gaze thoughtful, "about patterns, expectations, choices. About the example I want to set for Lily and Jake. What kind of example? I asked, curious about the direction of his thoughts. One of authenticity, he replied. Of pursuing genuine fulfillment rather than just meeting external markers. Of success. Of valuing relationships and experiences over appearances and possessions. He smiled slightly. Turns out my mother is a better role model than I realized. The observation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Happy tears, grateful tears for this moment of profound connection with my son. For the recognition that my journey toward a more authentic life wasn't just personal transformation, but a legacy I could offer to my family. Permission to question defaults, to prioritize joy, to seek meaning beyond obligation. As Thomas and I drove home later that night, the silver artist's palette earrings catching occasional glints from passing streetlights, I felt a sense of completion, unlike anything I had experienced before. Not the completion of arrival at a destination, but the completion that comes from aligning one's outer life with inner truth, from claiming space for one's authentic self in the world. Penny for your thoughts, Thomas said as we turned onto my street. I was just thinking, I replied, about how sometimes the most significant journeys begin with saying no to something that once seemed non-negotiable, like dog sitting. He chuckled, and booking a trip to the Bahamas instead. Exactly. That one decision, that one moment of choosing myself, changed everything. The ripple effect of courage, Thomas observed. One brave choice leading to another, and another, until you've created an entirely new pattern. As we pulled into my driveway, I looked at my modest home with fresh eyes, not as the container of decades of routine and obligation, but as the starting point for an unexpected journey of self-discovery that continued to unfold in ways I could never have imagined. I can't wait to see where this journey leads next, I said, as Thomas helped me from the car. Neither can I, he replied, his eyes warm with promise in the autumn night. Neither can I. Spring arrived in Riverdale with a riot of color. Daffodils, pushing through the soil in my front garden, cherry trees erupting in pink blossoms along Main Street, even the sky seeming somehow bluer, more vibrant than in years past. Or perhaps it was simply that I was noticing more, seeing the world with the attentive eyes of an artist rather than the hurried glance of someone perpetually rushing to meet others' needs. 6 months had passed since the community center exhibition, and life had settled into new, more balanced rhythms. Thomas and I continued our long-distance relationship with monthly visits that we both anticipated eagerly. My watercolor practice had deepened, with Eleanor encouraging me to experiment with more complex techniques and subjects. I had even sold 3 more paintings at a small gallery in downtown Riverdale, where Eleanor had helped me secure wall space. Most significantly, my relationship with David, Emma, and the children had evolved into something healthier, more reciprocal. Sunday dinners had resumed, though now on a twice-monthly schedule rather than weekly, and with the understanding that sometimes I would host and other times they would. Emma had gradually thawed as she realized my independence didn't threaten her family's stability, but actually enhanced it by modeling healthier boundaries for everyone. On a warm Saturday in April, I was in my garden planting the herbs I'd started. From seed, another new interest nurtured over the winter months, when David's car pulled into my driveway. This wasn't unusual. He had taken to stopping by occasionally on weekend mornings, sometimes with the children, sometimes alone. Today he was by himself, carrying a large cardboard box that he set down carefully on my porch before approaching me in the garden. "Good morning," I called, sitting back on my heels and removing my gardening gloves. "This is a nice surprise." "Morning, Mom." He smiled, but there was something tentative in his expression. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course." I stood, brushing soil from my knees. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Great, actually." He gestured toward the porch. "Let's sit down." Once settled on the porch swing, David seemed to struggle with how to begin. I waited patiently, having learned that sometimes silence creates the space others need to find their words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few months," he finally said. "About priorities. About what really matters. About the kind of life I want, not just the one I've fallen into." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Your changes, they've made me look at my own choices differently, made me question some assumptions." He glanced at me. "You know Emma? And I have been in couples counseling, right?" This was news to me. "I didn't know," I said softly. "But I think that's wonderful. It's been clarifying." He smiled slightly. "Challenging, but good. We're learning to communicate better, to understand each other's needs more clearly." He paused. "One of the things that's become clear is that neither of us is really happy in Oakwood Estates." This surprised me. But I thought that house was everything Emma wanted. The house, yes. The lifestyle that comes with it. The constant striving, the social obligations, the keeping up appearances. Not so much. He shook his head. "It turns out Emma's been feeling as trapped by expectations as I have. Her parents' expectations, her friends' expectations. The pressure to maintain a certain image has been exhausting for both of us." I considered this revelation, reminded again that people, even those closest to us, often hide their true feelings behind carefully constructed facades. "So we've made a decision," David continued. "We're selling the house." "You're what?" I couldn't hide my astonishment. "Selling the house," he repeated, more confidently now. "We've found a smaller place, closer to downtown. It has a wonderful yard for the kids, a studio space where Emma can pursue her interest in photography. Did you know she used to be quite passionate about that before we got married? And a reasonable mortgage that won't require both of us to work 60-hour weeks." I was momentarily speechless, processing this unexpected development. "That sounds wonderful, David. But what about Emma's parents? What about your position at the firm?" He smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression I hadn't seen on his face in years. "That's the other news. I've accepted a new position with a smaller company. Less prestige, more flexibility, work I actually believe in. And as for Diana and Thomas Parker..." He shrugged. "They'll adjust, or they won't. Emma and I are prioritizing what works for our family now, not what looks good to others." The parallels to my own journey were unmistakable. The shifting priorities, the courage to make changes despite external expectations, the movement toward authenticity, even when it meant disappointing others. "I'm proud of you," I said simply. "Both of you. These sound like thoughtful choices." "They are, and they're directly inspired by you, Mom." His expression grew serious. "Watching you reclaim your life, pursue your interests, stand your ground even when we made it difficult, it showed me another way was possible. Showed Emma, too, though she'd probably never admit it directly." I felt a swell of emotion. Not pride exactly, but a deep satisfaction that my personal journey had created space for my son to examine his own path more critically. "There's one more thing," David said, gesturing to the box he'd brought. "I found these when we were packing up the house. I thought you might want them." Curious, I opened the cardboard flaps to find several photo albums and scrapbooks I hadn't seen in years. Records of David's childhood, family vacations, school events, all carefully preserved from before the digital age made such physical mementos less common. "I thought these were lost in the move after your father died," I said softly, lifting out an album from David's elementary school years. "They were in the attic all this time." He watched as I turned the pages, both of us smiling at images of a gap-toothed David proudly displaying school art projects, riding his first bicycle, building snowmen in our front yard. Looking through, "These reminded me of how present you always were, Mom. How you never missed a school play or a soccer game, even when you were working double shifts. I traced a photo of the two of us at a county fair, cotton candy in hand, matching smiles, beneath a summer sky. I wouldn't have missed those moments for anything. I know that now, he said quietly. And I want Lily and Jake to have those same kinds of memories. Parents who are truly present, not just physically there, but distracted by work stress or social obligations or financial pressures. We spent the next hour looking through the albums together, reminiscing, laughing, occasionally growing quiet with shared remembrance of more difficult times. The period after Robert's death, the lean years when college tuition stretched our resources thin. As David prepared to leave, he hesitated on the porch steps. "There's one more thing I wanted to ask you," he said. "Thomas mentioned during dinner last month that his lease is up on his Portland condo in July. He seemed uncertain about renewing it." I nodded, unsurprised that David had picked up on this. Thomas and I had been discussing our future more concretely lately, acknowledging that our current arrangement, while workable, wasn't sustainable long-term. "Yes, we've been talking about next steps," I confirmed. "Is he considering moving to Riverdale?" David asked directly. "It's one possibility we're discussing." "And the other possibility?" I took a deep breath. "That I might move to Portland, at least part-time. We've talked about me keeping my house here, at least initially, but spending more time there, testing the waters." David nodded slowly, processing this. "How do you feel about that idea?" "Excited," I admitted, "and nervous. I've never lived anywhere but Riverdale. But also, ready for a new adventure, I think." My son studied me for a moment, then smiled. "You know what? I think you are too." He hugged me, a genuine embrace, without reservation. "Whatever you decide, Mom, I support you. We all do." As I watched him drive away, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because all questions were answered or all paths certain, but because the relationship with my son had healed and strengthened in ways I hadn't dared hope for a year ago. That evening, during my nightly call with Thomas, I shared the conversation with David, including his observation about Thomas's lease situation. "Your son is perceptive," Thomas said warmly. "I have indeed been thinking about next steps for us." "And what thoughts have you been having?" I asked, my heart beating a little faster. "Well, I've been considering that Portland has excellent galleries that might be interested in the work of an emerging watercolorist," he began, "and also that Riverdale has a certain small-town charm that an urban planner might find refreshing after decades in a larger city." "Those both sound like interesting observations," I replied, smiling into the phone. "Sarah," his voice grew, more serious, "I don't want to pressure you. Moving from the only home you've known would be a significant change. But I also want you to know that I'm committed to finding a solution that works for both of us. Whether that's me relocating to Riverdale, you coming to Portland, or some creative combination of both." The sincerity in his voice touched me deeply. This was what real partnership looked like: mutual consideration, shared problem-solving, respect for each other's needs and circumstances. "I'm ready for a change," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Not necessarily leaving Riverdale completely, at least not right away. But I'd like to try living in Portland with you, Thomas. See if we can build something permanent together." His intake of breath was audible. "Are you sure?" "I am," I confirmed, feeling a sense of rightness settle over me. "This past year has taught me that I'm more adaptable than I ever realized, that new beginnings can happen at any age, that sometimes the most growth comes from stepping into the unknown rather than clinging to the familiar." "You continue to amaze me, Sarah Johnson," he said softly. "Your courage, your willingness to evolve, they're remarkable." "I had a good teacher," I replied, A certain stray dog named Max, who needed a sitter last summer. Thomas's laugh warmed me through the phone line. Remind me to thank that dog. Someday. 2 weeks later, I stood in my living room surrounded by my closest friends. Nancy and Paul, Carol and her new boyfriend Harold, Eleanor from my watercolor class, even Janet, who had flown in from Seattle for the occasion. Thomas was there too, of course, as were David, Emma, and the children. "If I could have everyone's attention," Thomas called, raising his glass of champagne, "I'd like to propose a toast." The room quieted as everyone turned toward us, glasses in hand. "To Sarah," Thomas began, his eyes finding mine across the room, who had the courage to choose the Bahamas instead of dog-sitting, and in doing so, began a journey that brought her not only to Nassau's shores, but to new shores within herself, who showed all of us that it's never too late to reclaim your life, to pursue your passions, to open your heart to new possibilities. He moved to stand beside me, taking my hand, and who has agreed, just this morning, to marry me. The room erupted in cheers and congratulations as Thomas slipped a simple, elegant ring onto my finger, a moment I had not anticipated when I woke that morning, but which felt like the natural culmination of the journey we had begun on a Caribbean beach. Later, as our friends and family celebrated around us, David pulled me aside for a quiet moment. "You're happy," he said. It wasn't a question. "Extraordinarily so," I confirmed. "Then I'm happy for you, for both of you." He glanced across the room where Thomas was showing Jake something on his phone, both of them laughing. "He's a good man, and you deserve every bit of this joy, Mom." "Thank you," I said simply, squeezing his hand. "That means everything." As the evening wound down, I found myself on the porch swing with Thomas, watching the first stars appear in the spring sky. In 2 months, we would begin our new adventure together, dividing our time between Portland and Riverdale initially, then deciding where to settle more permanently after the wedding in the fall. "Penny for your thoughts," Thomas said, his arm warm around my shoulders. I considered the question, reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the frustrated woman who had booked an impulsive trip to the Bahamas rather than dog sit yet again, to the woman I was now, engaged, pursuing artistic passions I'd neglected for decades, enjoying healthier relationships with my family, and preparing for a new chapter in a new city. "I was thinking about ripples," I said, finally. How one decision, one moment of choosing myself, created waves that transformed every aspect of my life. How saying no to dog-sitting ultimately led me to saying yes to so much more. To painting, to new friendships, to you, to a different vision of what my future could be. Thomas nodded, understanding as he always did. The courage to change. One thing often reveals the courage to change everything that needs changing. As we sat together in the gentle spring evening, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not because all questions were answered or all challenges resolved, but because I had learned that I could trust myself to face whatever came next with authenticity and strength. The woman who had once defined herself primarily through service and sacrifice to others had discovered something essential: that true love, for family, for partners, for friends, and most importantly, for oneself, flourishes best not in self-erasure, but in the soil of self-respect and healthy boundaries. It had taken a dog named Max, a spontaneous trip to the Bahamas, and the courage to stand firm in the face of guilt and manipulation. But the journey had led me here, to this porch, this moment, this man, this future bright with possibility. And I wouldn't change a single step of the path. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.